Hello and welcome to episode number 12 of the podcast A Surprise. We're excited today to be discussing a little sacrifice. I'm here with Essie Shell, Sheen Aziz, and I'm Kai Gloval.
It works.
It works. But we're here today to discuss the short story A Little Sacrifice, which had a lot of discussion around it. It's one of the fandom's favorite short stories, and we're here to break it down. We're going to talk about all the different themes. We're going to talk about the characters, and yeah, we're going to go all through it today. Super excited to be here with my co-hosts Michal and Aziz. What's going on, guys?
Not too much.
Same here, yeah. Just excited that it's getting somewhat springy over here. We're down where I live, and things are looking up. So, a good time for some more Witcher action.
Yeah, it's starting to get lighter out later, which is really nice. I can't stand how during the winter up here in the north, it's dark at 4 p.m. It literally kills me. Yep. So anyways, let's talk about my winter depression. We're getting closer and closer to season 2 of The Witcher as well. That's progressing. But today we're here to talk about, of course, A Little Sacrifice from Sword of Destiny. For those of you who come to the podcast, know that we have two different versions of the podcast. One, a live version that we do on YouTube, and of course, a version that goes up on Anchor that's downloadable, where you can find all from iTunes, the connections to iTunes, Spotify, and all of that. So for those of you that do want to check out the podcast A Surprise, you can find all the links to our homepage and sponsor Anchor in the description of the video for those of you that want to listen on different platforms. Plus, if you do want to give us a rating, that really helps us out. Say, hey, we love the podcast, or don't.
Say, we hate the podcast.
We hate the podcast. Shut you guys down. But yeah, it's really great for feedback, of course, and it really helps the podcast grow. So yeah, shall we start off with a quote, Michal?
Yeah. Just to preface, this is Essie talking about the sea, what she associates with it. With change, and with riddles, with mystery, with something I cannot grasp, which I might be able to describe in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different poems, never actually reaching the core, the heart of the matter.
Oh yeah, I love that. We tried to discuss like how this story made us feel, and it was a sentiment that sort of was expressed in a number of different ways by y'all, by us, by just people out there in the fandom, that it's kind of hard to encapsulate this whole story. And so I thought that quote kind of captures that feeling of how hard it is to really pin this story down, even though we have a lot to say about it. So yeah, let the feels begin.
And Aziz, we shall move on to this synopsis.
Yes. Geralt the Witcher is facing a nasty piece of work, yet he's not fighting the creature, he's helping him get married to a mermaid. Her name is Shianat, and she is not nasty, especially if you go by the various agreeing descriptions of her physical features. And it's not just her appearance that's striking, but her voice, which Geralt is tasked with translating.
It was the language of the elves, a euphonious version of which was used by mermaids, sea witches, and nereids.
Though her voice is beautiful, she and her suitor, the creature called Duke Aglaval, are engaged in a bitter argument over their relationship. In some ways, it's a typical lover's quarrel, but in other ways, it's anything but typical.
And will he not sacrifice those 2 hideous pegs for me? Love doesn't just mean taking. One also has to be able to give up things, to make sacrifices.
Then again, in the last story, we saw Dopplers who can change shape in ways that would make swapping fins for legs or the reverse seem trivial. However, legs versus tails is a lesser problem compared to the issues of humans and their lack of gills. Though I have yet to refer to Duke Aglaval as human, he is gill-free and guilty, as we'll see. The mermaid draws a line in the sand, proverbially, since they're at sea, declaring she will not settle. There will be sacrifice, or there will be nothing. This angers the Duke, who tells our Witcher-turned-interpreter that in terms of payment, there will be results, or there will be nothing. This creates a difficult situation for Geralt, as well as Dandelion, because they are hungry. Dandelion asks if Geralt is angry with him for their lack of funds, and though his actions certainly accelerated their trip down the road to poverty, as well as down the road to this coastal town they're in now called Bremervoord, he says he's not angry, and maybe he really isn't. He's not exactly unfamiliar with life on the road with Dandelion by now, but he's not happy either. Dandelion giveth and Dandelion Dandelion? Dandelion giveth, and Dandelion taketh away, and his fame almost immediately solves the problem it helped create. He is invited to play at a wedding, and after a brief negotiation in which he both insists he must uphold the standards he's set for himself, they're off to partake in a delicious wedding feast. A detail that arose during the conversation was that Dandelion would be the second bard present. Normally, this would conflict with those very same professional standards we've just mentioned, but as it turns out, Dandelion has a prior relationship with the other bard, Essie Davin, a.k.a. Little Eye. Surprisingly to both reader and Witcher, Dandelion's relationship with Essie Davin is not only platonic, but borderline familial. Geralt begins awkwardly introducing himself only for Dandelion to cut to the heart of the matter, a pattern that will continue throughout the story, as well as Dandelion's recurring use of a certain nickname.
Don't bash Little Eye with all that stammering and tittling. She's Essie, he's Geralt, end of introductions. Let's get to the point, Poppet. If you call me Poppet once more, you'll get a slap.
But she's fine with the name Little Eye, and Geralt notes with eloquence he could think but not speak how the phrase eyes like stars would, for once, be fitting rather than poetic license. And at last, Geralt gets in some quality eating time. The respite is brief, however. None other than Duke Aglaval himself shows up at the wedding, though not as a guest. He has a problem and needs the Witcher for a problem more suited to his skills than an interpreter, but just as connected to the sea. His bailiff/pearl diving steward, Zelest, quietly explains that a boat was found with all hands missing, minus some blood and gore left behind, indicating a massacre of some kind. Quietly, because news like this can and eventually does shut down all citizen activity at the harbor, he tells this. In other words, a town that depends on the sea to survive is avoiding the sea. First thing tomorrow, Geralt will head down and investigate. In the meantime, he goes to speak with Essie. It hadn't gone well when they were first introduced, and they both wish to remedy that. Geralt is attracted to her, and the feeling is mutual, but not nearly identical. Essie has fallen for Geralt at first sight, but the Witcher continues to find himself in situations where, as illogical as love may be, the only seemingly logical conclusion to be gleaned from Geralt's inner thoughts is that no one will ever measure up to Yennefer. He loves her, and no other. Essie is young, a factor in her own self-described impetuousness. She has limited experience with the not uncommon and painful trial and error process that is young love. And as a beautiful and talented performer, she's probably rejected more men than have rejected her. Far more. It's very easy to see why. It's common for her. Geralt himself is not unused to catching the eye of women who see him as an alluring curiosity, unique, famous, rugged, dangerous. It's very easy to see why. It's common for him. As Dandelion will insightfully break down for us soon afterwards, Geralt makes the mistake of seeing Little Eye as someone who sees him in that same common manner. The Witcher perceived her attraction, but not the greater depth below the surface. In most cases, there's nothing below the surface. And though there's nothing automatically wrong with a one-night stand, this is a rare chance to conversate with another soul whom others see as an alluring curiosity. She is someone who knows what it's like to be reduced to their outwardly facing traits. She is a kindred spirit in that sense, if not others. Geralt is thus upset with himself afterwards, unable to forgive himself this error. There is bitterness, perhaps because the world does not offer him many chances for deep connections, and of course, regular old embarrassment. And he's blaming her somewhat. He's pondering all this, or perhaps just seething over it as Dandelion meets him back at their room. Though he does it in a rather blunt manner, Dandelion effectively interprets the situation and helps Geralt see that mostly he's got no one to blame but himself.
Do you know what your problem is, Geralt? You think you're different. You flaunt your otherness, what you consider abnormal. You aggressively impose that abnormality on others, not understanding that for people who think clear-headedly, you're the most normal man under the sun, and they all wish that everybody was so normal.
Dandelion proceeds to bring up Yennefer, suggesting that Geralt is acting this way because of her. It may be true that he's this way because of her, but we've seen her say similar things. She doesn't like it when Geralt calls himself mutant or other either. The Witcher shuts down the conversation, not eager to speak about Yennefer, and though Dandelion has stolen the blanket, he's ready to fall asleep. Geralt sets out in the morning to deal with the massacre on the pearl diving ship, only to find Essie already there at shore. Having lived most of her life by the sea, she's able to help him think through the problem using the available evidence. They present their thoughts to the Duke, who reacts with anger and suspicion, saying he can't be sure the Witcher, while acting as interpreter, didn't lie to Sheonats about something, and that the townsfolk might blame the Duke himself for enraging the mermaid, leading to this, her revenge. Thus do things come to a head. Though they cannot be sure who or what killed the crew, it must be dealt with or the town will begin to suffer hunger and worse will follow. Though he knows he can simply leave, Geralt angrily confirms that he will fulfill the task if possible because he agreed to. Little Eye believes it has more to do with his compassion, while Geralt stonily insists it's his Witcher code that makes these decisions for him.
A specialist, in whom it was instilled that the code of his profession and cold routine is more legitimate than emotion, that they protect him against making a mistake, which could be made should he become entangled in the dilemmas of good and evil, of order and chaos.
She claims he's in denial about the possibility that Sheonats is implicated, but Geralt denies that he's in denial, pointing out that it would be pointless, because he would never kill a mermaid anyway. But Little Eye is a quick thinker and points out that the Witcher Code only solves professional dilemmas, not personal dilemmas. To this, he has no answer except to think of Yennefer and to steer the conversation back towards this first dilemma, them. Essie explains, and Geralt is astonished to hear how much variation occurs in the water levels as the tides shift. As he's formulating an idea, Sheonats herself appears and waves to them, telling them what a lovely couple they are, while expressing more frustration at her Duke's unwillingness to make sacrifices. Geralt responds by saying Essie is not his beloved, that he barely knows her. This is upsetting to Essie, who has just experienced love at first sight, but Geralt has no idea of her feelings on the matter, as she shows none of this emotion in the moment. Instead, surprising everyone by speaking directly to the mermaid in her language.
"How gorgeous!" she cried. "You know our tongue. Upon my word, you astonish me, you humans. Verily, not nearly as much divides us as people say."
Trying his best not to mer-splain the situation, the Witcher is compelled to point out that, well, someone or something down there is dividing us right now, given these killings. They ask her about the deaths, which occurred near a pair of volcanic reefs called the Dragon's Fangs, which also mark the general area where the tide recedes farthest out. Sheonats angrily tells them to stay away, to not go near the steps. The steps? Underwater steps? Yeah, Dandelion has a similar reaction and wants to check this out for himself. Plus, he senses a different sort of opportunity, to find a present left by the sea.
The point is, it's a symbol, a sign of concern and affection. I like Little Eye, and I want to please her. Don't you understand? I thought not. Let's go. You first, because there might be a monster down there.
Right. Right indeed, except you can drop the word might and make it plural, meaning there are definitely monsters, plural, down there, but not hungry beasts from the deep, though that is terrifying enough. This is worse. Their excursion leads to finding the excitingly mysterious steps that they were told to not go near, and an insistent, screaming mermaid voice that told them that they ignore. Dandelion seems to know where they are, claiming it's the lost city of Ys, already claiming that he'll write such a ballad of it that the competition won't know what hit them. A moment later, they hear an ominous bell-like sound from below. It reminds Dandelion of the words to a legend that he begins to recite, but after only 2 lines, several somethings burst from the water, intent on leaving the bard and the Witcher dead without knowing what hit them. Creatures with the eyes of fish, but with hands, and swords, spears, and armor. Whoa, they look scary, and also like culprits, as in the ones who killed the Pearl Divers. Geralt fights off 3 of them, just buying respite for Dandelion to haul him up to higher ground where they can begin to flee more rapidly. But more of them come. Some he kills, and he's wounded and concerned. The tide has returned, and he's not sure he'll escape. In that moment, he thinks of Yennefer and promises himself he'll go to her and try again if he survives. As if reading his mind, as if to make this some sort of binding contract, Sheonats reappears, as if she wasn't regal enough. This time she's riding a dolphin, which I hear is like the Ferrari of the sea. And on top of that, she's wielding undersea authority beyond our ability to fathom. She's blowing a conch, perhaps outranking the booming bells, or something, and the pursuit ceases. The mermaid shouts a greeting, but tells them to hurry as she's only delayed their assault. They'll be back. Despite the underwater army, Geralt's wound, and the information about the steps and the implications that go along with all of this, Aglaval stands on technicality, refusing to pay. Essie poetically reprimands the Duke and also advises him not to go to war with this undersea race. They are not like the elves to be slowly pushed back. This is the sea, not the forest, far more immense, and not really for humans besides. Aglaval eloquently disagrees, claiming her notions are romantic, and siding instead with the inevitable violence of human progress.
It is we, not your ballads, who create the chronicles of humanity.
As if in retort, Shianat suddenly enters the room on 2 legs. She's visited a sea witch, apparently the best leg job specialist in the area because her new appendages are worth showing off. Everything is to scale. The arrogant and proud Aglaval actually bends his 2 legs, dropping to his knees. He's astonished and unable to say much, but she has just the right words.
Indeed, because I love you too, you loon. And what kind of love would it be if the one who loves were not capable of a little sacrifice?
Back at their lodgings, it's time to clean up. Before they were attacked, Dandelion had gathered a sack full of mollusks that he hoped would yield a pearl or 3. As Geralt puts it, fate hurt him and did what had to be done. A faintly beautiful blue pearl emerges from the mess, and Essie is moved. She tells Geralt how strongly she feels.
She stood before him, and Geralt regretted it was her and not the fish-eyed creature with a sword who had hidden beneath the water. He had stood a chance against that creature, but against her, he had none.
Not only is he unsure what to say, he's not even sure how to sit.
She sat down, reluctantly, tactfully, far away, too close. Can't make up her mind.
So good. She tells him that she understands that her feelings don't make sense, that she's ashamed, that she feels unable to breathe, like she's sick. Again, however, he thinks of Yennefer and says nothing, and Essie continues to confess. This is where the author seems to intend that we, the reader, interpret these characters' complex emotions through the lens of our own perceptions and feelings, that we consider our own chaotic, inexplicable experience with love and attraction, that we take our own inability to put these personal delvings into words and say, yeah, well, how would even the most skilled wordsmith describe this stuff? After all, poets and authors and artists and regular folk, and now, too, podcasters, have been trying to explain and describe such things since time immemorial. And though many attempts are worthy of acclaim, many have been repeated, many are beautiful, no one's ever fully succeeded or will in capturing and putting this into words. We should be naive to expect clarity from something as deep and impenetrable as the sea itself. Geralt has no idea what to do, and I suppose few readers would have much advice for him. Like, yeah, what is Geralt supposed to say there? I don't know. The ending of the story, as well, is quite open to interpretation, but it leaves no doubt as to the outcome and removes chance of a possible future. Duke Aglaval is not a decent man, but the true villain of the story is not him, nor the inhabitants of Ys, the sunken city. It is fate, and perhaps the author, who gives us hope like this.
I can see that pearl, he said with an effort, set in silver, a little silver flower with intricate petals. I see it around your neck, on a delicate silver chain, worn like I wear my medallion. That will be your talisman, Essie. A talisman which will protect you from all evil.
Following that, we have a reasonable enough resolution involving Dandelion's encouragement and the phrase, and everything was all right. Look, when you say everything was all right, it really gives the sense that, everything is all right. Right, all? So when the narrative jumps ahead to have her die, still quite young from plague 4 years afterwards, it stings, to say the least. We had war averted by man-to-mermaid marriage, and the protagonists were in pretty good shape, all things considered. They even made soup together, and both of them sang for Geralt while he lay in the grass, continuing to think about Yennefer, of course. It looked like a happy ending. It was not. It was tragic, beautifully tragic. We hear that Dandelion buries her himself with her lute and her pearl talisman with the intricate petals deep in the forest as she had wanted. She was pretty young to have already expressed a preference as to where she wanted to be buried, but Dandelion knew her well. It is pointed out in the story and others, and is obvious through simple repetition that Dandelion rarely shuts up. That, and other of his not virtuous qualities, are ironically ironclad evidence of his eternal devotion to Essie Davin. We're speaking of a bard who is an absolute glutton for adoration, who cannot resist a chance to increase or indulge his fame. Yet he stays true to her in the most intimate manner, composing a ballad of the events, a song of love that endured even in death. But
he never sang it. Never. To no one.
Whew. How many people in chat felt the end of that story hit them like a big sack of bricks, right? When me and Aziz and Michal were discussing this the other day, it's like, we kind of all agreed that the story is in some ways incomplete. It felt like a bridge story, but also it's like incredibly enlightening, and also has plot devices that move the story forward as well. So I'm really interested to hear both of kind of your thoughts on this. Like I said, for me personally, that ending, like the connection to Essie, like I feel like as people, we can empathize with her because we can, more associate ourselves with someone like her as opposed to, a monster killer like Geralt. So it was just so sad in the end to see her die like that. But it was also really illuminating to see Dandelion understand her so well and really make that gesture to honor her life like that. So yeah, really interesting and curious to see your overall thoughts. And in chat, we will move into themes and world building and lore, and that's what we're going to get into. We're really going to break it down. But yeah, what do you guys think of this one?
I love this story, but it is a tough one. I feel like we're almost going to have less of an analysis and more just like an exploration of the story. And it's, I don't know, like it's very meaningful. The relationships I think all really shine in this episode, in this story, but it doesn't necessarily prepare you, at least on first read, for that like gut punch of an ending. And like it's such a deliberate craft decision to take these figures that Sapkowski has set up and use them in that way. There's a lot. I mean, you could like the sea metaphors like come all over the place, right? Like there's undercurrents of sad stuff in the story, but then like it only comes out at the end in like a cresting wave and blah blah blah. But yeah, I mean it's a beautiful story, and also one that I do have to say is really worth listening to on audiobook because Peter Kenny does Geralt as the mermaid, in doing the mermaid voice in a song, and it is among the funniest things I've heard in my life.
Is it as funny as Roy Dotrice doing Arya?
It's funny. It's in a better way.
It's intentionally funny instead of accidentally funny. Yeah.
His voice is like dripping with awkwardness. It's so great.
Yeah, and the singing style, which you did some of too. That's really good. Yeah, I was glad to hear you do that. Yeah, it's super. Like I think we have in our notes, this is the saddest ending so far, most likely, and it's going to be hard to surpass that. Not that anyone necessarily is eager for something sadder, but hey, and yeah, it's got it maybe even extends the range that Sapkowski often delves into, where he merges silly with serious, and it just like expands on all the elements within that. Like it's sillier in some ways than others, but in ways that just work super well. Like the silliness,
like love across borders with fish people and men.
yeah, exactly. Like it's like on the surface, it's like, huh? But it works so well because he uses like the silliness isn't like on the outside. It's part of the story. It's he's using it to make a point. It's like, look, this relationship worked, where these humans like they couldn't get theirs to work, like these regular folks. So it's just going to show like Shionats is this great symbol of making things work, and of course the sacrifices and all that is obviously part of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's well, first of all, it's a story with like multiple powerful female characters, which I really appreciate it also. But I just feel like it's so annoying that it's so hard to like get a real grip on this story. But
you feel like it's missing something, the presence of a certain someone, like Yennefer?
Well, that's definitely very deliberate. That's definitely very, but I think
I
Yennefer would not work well in this story because it is about subtle things.
Mhm.
And I love Yennefer. She's not subtle. Yeah, I don't know. It's so beautiful. Like it's really like a puzzle. I read it 3 times in preparation for this, and each time I was like, I might be getting it. I think I might be getting it, and then it like dissolved away from me.
Like a pearl.
But somehow I don't hold that against the story, so that's really
It's impressive that we can note, like, have somewhat obvious criticisms, but don't actually consider them criticisms. It's just like, no, I can't explain this, but I don't think that's a flaw in the story. I think that's just how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's like, how can you? It's the same thing. Like, how can you explain love? Like, putting love into words is like impossible. And so, like, of course, a story about it is also going to be that way.
You know what's so great about it, and I know Michal will get into this, kind of like the stages of where Geralt and Yennefer's relationship is. You consider this the rebound stage. I'll let you talk about that, which makes a lot of sense. But it feels like this is kind of a bridge story, but it's still so important because the next 2 stories are so important, right? We really get a lot of Ciri and Yennefer, and then we move into the kind of the main stuff, right? And this one is so important in showing how important the relationship of Yennefer and Geralt is, right? Like it's so important.
She's basically in it, like you said. Like, she's not in it, but she basically is, because she's mentioned constantly. Geralt's thinking of her like every few minutes, and it's also
aware that she's in competition with Yennefer, who she's never met.
Yeah, that's true. And she knows a few things about her, and it probably sounds intimidating, like this powerful sorceress. Like, whoa, like who? Everyone knows things about sorceresses and knows they're beautiful and all that. So there's just a lot. Yeah, there's a lot. She can imagine, what she's up against, quote unquote up against, and being a person with a great imagination, because she's an artist and a poet, she probably is, her mind has gone all over the place, probably with thoughts of what Yennefer is like without
it's
not, confirm it.
It's not even that she's a bad match for Geralt, because Dandelion thinks that they could have a good relationship, but it's like so impossible for Geralt to have a relationship with anyone else than Yennefer, really, because he's a witcher, she's a sorceress. Yeah, like eventually Geralt's going to live on and she's going to die, and it's like it's not to say that Geralt can't have these relationships with people because he has trouble opening up emotionally. But this just shows, like, it's kind of like that superhero trope, like where the superhero can't have a relationship with someone that's like Superman and Lois Lane. He's constantly putting her life in danger, for example. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a hard relationship to have. There's so many kind of intricacies behind that, like putting that person in danger, even though you might care about them. And I don't think it's that Geralt didn't care about it in this scenario, because they sleep together, and we'll talk about that. But it's just the Yennefer and Geralt are meant to be together. They are destined to be together, which is such a huge theme. I mean, it's like the main theme in The Witcher, destiny, right? And like what you do with it. So it's just it's a really interesting story to kind of grasp, because it feels kind of incomplete, but at the same time, I feel like it's not, because it really gives this kind of path for other stories to open up, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that, I think plot-wise, there isn't anything in this story that is crucial going forward to understand about The Witcher. So, like, I don't know if you could put it on a list of, like, you don't want to read both The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny, so here's, just the stories that you really have to read from them. But artistically, I think understanding, well, first of all, I mean, there's a ton of character work here, but understanding the way Sapkowski writes, he uses at the end a device that he comes back to a lot. And I think it's the first time that he uses it here. And the ability to kind of just like find sadness in these moments that are happy at the same time. And the story is precipitated by a love story and a wedding, so or an engagement. So it's really fascinating like that.
And it's a good point too. You guys pointed out the line in which this or the bridge it creates to the main series, where there's still Sword of Destiny and whatever the last one is.
Something more.
Something more, right? And which are basically direct like prequels to the main story, whereas these are just stories that are before the main story they're relevant, but they're not as directly connected. So in a sense, this is the last true standalone short story.
Yeah,
you could make that argument anyway.
You can make the argument that those two stories are actually kind of just parts of Blood of Elves, really, kind of like
exactly
the first starting 2 chapters or whatever you want to call it, because it's really the origin of how, like, Ciri and Geralt and in Yennefer and Ciri.
Yeah, but this story is beloved by the fandom, as I understand it, and it doesn't do that, which is really interesting. Like it doesn't hold that like canonical significance, but it's still really, really valued. I was actually teasing Kyle because he's so obsessed with the one and done character of Nivellen, and I'm like, well, I see your Nivellen and I raise you Essie for like a one and done character who makes a much bigger impact than a disproportionate impact to their. No,
I think Essie has a far more significant impact because look, like Dandelion is a pretty good boy at the end of this story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really important for his character. Yeah, this is the a couple episodes ago we mentioned maybe this is him at his worst, and that is him at his best potentially. Other than his loyalty to Geralt, which is good.
We kind of have to argue whether Sapkowski intentionally wanted to have Essie as big of an impact as she did, because Dandelion never he wants to acquire fame, right? Like a bard not singing a song, that's a pretty big deal. It shows how much respect he had for his fellow craftsman, another bard.
He has no self-control, but he has this is the kind of self-control that he keeps for his whole life. So that it's in a totally separate category for him in terms of how he feels about it. So that is really special. And it's ironic, like I said in the synopsis, that it's because he's so loose in general and sloppy with his morals and behavior that this really stands out, because it's like a guy who's always like that. We're like, okay, well, we just respect him constantly. Of course he's going to handle this situation well too. So, but coming from Dandelion, it's a big surprise. It's like, oh, you do have this gear. How nice. That's awesome.
Yeah, he showed maturity, essentially.
Yeah. Like if Dandelion had his own child or something, or actually had a sister he had to care, like an actual sister that he felt that he had to help take care of, maybe that would have, if that had been more in his life early on, that's the kind of thing that maybe affects you going forward and changes who you are. But, I guess he just didn't have that kind of upbringing, or maybe he was just that kind of person. Who knows?
It's like dragging individual examples of women that Dandelion can respect out of the entire mass.
Gotta find one.
By the way, before we move on real quick, I just wanted to shout out the Teacock Podcast Network. Our friend Thomas is such a great guy. He is a long time A Song of Ice and Fire geek like us, and he does the New Dad podcast if you guys want to go check him out. But he just shouted out, has a donation here in chat, and we just he says, "Surprise! Welcome back, my friend. We really appreciate your support, man, and just wanted to give a shout out to him. He's awesome."
Yeah.
I do want to give Dandelion credit for one thing, and I guess by extension Sapkowski, because neither of them fall into that really annoying trope of this person might sleep with my sister, I must defend imaginary honor and blah blah blah.
Oh yeah.
Dandelion is all for Geralt and Essie having a relationship if they both want one, and I give him props for that.
He's usually so sarcastic about it and embellishes and things, but he's he truly thinks that this is good for Geralt.
He is sex positive. I cannot deny it. This line is sex positive.
Yeah, he is. He is anything. He is a symbol of that, right?
And Geralt doesn't discriminate. He's pro sex worker and all of that. You know what I mean? So it's him having a relationship with. I don't want to call Essie a normie because she's a bard. You know what I mean? She's more normal than a lot of the people he's had interactions with, I think.
Well, I think that's, if I could segue, I think that's personally a tentative theory, because a lot of what I have about the story are really just tentative theories. But a theory about why Geralt is struggling so much in this story. And I think it might be because he really doesn't know how to relate to Essie, because he does have attraction to her, like he acts like, he kind of malfunctions in the presence of two bars at once, when they
Yeah.
But like, he is, and he's like, kiss her hand, Dandelion says. And like, it's like, oh no, that has sexual connotations. And like, what, he's more awkward than the situation I think would warrant if he was not interested in Essie. And obviously we have all of his like weird attempts to kind of sleep with her, kiss her, or whatever, and then kind of pull back and pretend that didn't happen and be like, no, it's you, not me. But I really kind of think he has at this point two romantic modes, which is either, a relationship with a sex worker, which is no emotions and just about physical things, or his relationship with Yennefer, which is, the most codependent,
all about sacrifice, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It is all of him. And she is a huge part of him. And that's why she's in this story, because she's in Geralt. And I think he might not, like, he thinks that to make any romantic, gesture toward Essie would make her one or the other. And I think that is what he's struggling with. And that's why he kind of like goes out and they do that weird, awkward kiss dance thing in the beginning. And then, but she doesn't want to sleep with him then. And then, obviously, because their sleeping together is framed as a resolution.
Yeah.
So I do think that I'm not 100% sure. I feel like Sapkowski could look at that explanation and be like, no, you're wrong. But like, but I think there's something to it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, because I think that she fell in love with him a bit, but that was kind of like the young person's like, she calls it impetuousness herself, and she kind of, by the end, she seems to get over that part, but she still has the attraction part. I think she gets over the like crush that she sees as love, but she still wants to like sleep with him. She gets past that part, and they're like, and Dandelion helps them kind of resolve that a bit here at the end. But yeah, I think you're right too, that there might be I think the way you framed it is really good, that Geralt doesn't understand this like half measure. He's like all or nothing, nothing being just the gratification part, and all being, no, it's got to be love and devotion, and there's no middle ground. And that, I think that's a good way to describe it. And that's very much in contrast to Sheanats and Aglaval, who objectively, it seems like more needs to be sacrificed for their relationship to work. But in this world that has, sea witches that can do leg jobs, then apparently it's not so strange.
That's truly a love across borders, because she had to go to a leg job specialist to get on land. Get it? Oh, okay, bad joke.
She went to a sea witch, and it's really interesting that at least the translation calls it an operation, not a spell or anything. So
yeah,
that's quite the image, I think.
So there's a couple of good quotes. Y'all pulled someone pulled a sacrifice quote here. We should read that one.
Sorry, where are we? Okay, yeah. So this is when Geralt is kind of when he and Essie have their pearl conversation. A little sacrifice, he thought, just a little sacrifice. For this will calm her, a hug, a kiss, calm caresses. She doesn't want anything more. And even if she did, what of it? For a little sacrifice, a very little sacrifice, is beautiful and were she to want more, it would calm her, a quiet, calm, gentle act of love. And it doesn't matter, because Essie smells of verbena, not lilac and gooseberry, doesn't have cool, electrifying skin. Essie's hair is not a black tornado of gleaming curls. Essie's eyes are gorgeous, soft, warm, and cornflower blue. They don't blaze with a cold, unemotional, deep violet. Essie will fall asleep afterward, turn her head away, open her mouth slightly. Essie will not smile in triumph. For Essie is not Yennefer, and that is why I cannot find that little sacrifice inside myself.
He just cannot not compare her to Yennefer to anyone, right?
Inconceivable to him that he would that he would. I don't know what his sacrifice is. Like, is it the physical action, or is it like the emotion that he is probably right would go along with it? Like, I'm not even sure. It's one of the things I don't really understand. I chose this quote, but I don't really understand it. So.
Maybe to humor her a bit. Like, I don't know if he's just trying to let her down easy. I mean, because he knows that she's impetuous. She's admitting that it's probably going to pass, even though she's not saying that. And he's she wants him to play along, just to go through the motions so that it's easier. I don't know. Yeah. It's, again, you throw these ideas out and go, maybe it kind of fits, but there's just no certainty, no way to know. And there's no way to find certainty either, is there?
Well, I think Geralt already knows that he's met his soulmate. How do you top that? You know what I mean? Like, okay, like I'm definitely going to see her again. Like, not to say that Essie isn't worthy of love, but it's kind of hard for Geralt after what he's experienced with Yennefer, I think.
I think he thinks she's worthy of someone that isn't in love with someone else, maybe.
Yeah.
If you want to put it that way, right? Yeah, someone that's actually going to be worthy partner to
someone that'll be all in.
Yeah, like he is for Yennefer. He needs get someone that loves you like Geralt loves Yennefer.
Love requires sacrifice. It requires requires both ends to be understanding, and Geralt is not willing to sacrifice everything he has for her.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it has, like he says later, I think, that like a very little sacrifice is no small thing or something like that, or is a very big thing indeed, something like that. And yeah, maybe that's like, he is just, he isn't talking about the initial moment. He's talking about kind of what would come after, maybe.
Interesting. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me because he is more experienced, he's not necessarily wise about relationships, but he's, a lot older than her, and she's supposedly like not even 20 yet. So she couldn't possibly have had a lot of relationships, even if she's naturally wiser about them. She's probably smarter. She's probably smarter about relationships than Geralt was at his age, but nevertheless, that was a long time ago, and he's since learned at least a couple of things.
He's 5 times your age, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So you figure he's learning at a faster rate than him, but he's got a huge head start.
and to some respect, the whole young love thing, like Geralt might understand that, like despite not being, despite Witcher's not showing emotion, you know what I mean? He's just, I think, a little bit more experienced with. Having failed relationships, you know what I mean? He might think that this would fail just based on their age, but I think it's obviously more than that.
Yeah.
And he does that sort of almost movie stereotypical thing where he tries to be like, oh no, you don't want me. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this. And you're like, Geralt, haven't you seen like teen romance films? You're just making her want you more.
I'm an outlaw. You don't want someone like me.
The idea of the forbidden fruit, you know what I mean? Like you really want something and you're going to continue to want a bite of it, I guess.
I live by a code. You're like, ooh.
But I think that's actually a good segue into the ownership and consent part of this story, because first of all, the word consent is used like twice in the initial conversation between Aglaval and Geralt and Shianaz. And because Geralt keeps asking her if like she consents or if he consents to whatever legging or delegging would happen. And that could just be a coincidence and just a translation thing. But there's a big theme through the story of like, there are certain things that are not for you, like why don't Witchers why can't Witchers like conquer the sea for humanity? It's not for them. Like it's, obviously there's just like the simple matter of like lungs, but there's
gills, your gills, you have them.
But like, I think there's a metaphor there of like things being too big for you. And like, there are just spheres that are just not like, it's, like there are things you can't have in this life. And the thing Essie can't have is Geralt, and the thing that, Geralt can't have is
a normal life.
Yeah.
He can't have feelings for he can't not have feelings for Yennefer.
Yeah, exactly. And it kind of like, I don't know, like I sort of tie that into like the the hidden city and like a pearl and like things being kind of like kept away from you. I don't really know if this story is like, there's a lot of great thematic threads here. I'm not totally sure if they all tie together, but I guess they're just worth mentioning.
Yeah, there is a lot of mirroring, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It's a familiar pattern we see. He likes to do that. You kind of use one pair or situation and then create a mirrored situation to show its opposite or to show its inversion. We've already mentioned this first one, like the Geralt and Essie relationship is framed as somehow more difficult than this mermaid-human relationship, which is a really cool Sapkowski style way to do that. And then we have things like Dandelion singing to this girl during the wedding ceremony or during the wedding feast or whatever, and it says how she becomes the most beautiful woman in the world or in the room. And then Essie and Geralt, when they have their awkward encounter where they sort of kiss and then, then go back out in the main room, she says, "I'll sing for you." Right. And it's kind of like saying, I'm going to make you feel like, really special or whatever. And it's a very similar sort of sentiment that I will bestow this on you. It's rather than taking you off and banging you, I'm going to, do something meaningful in a different way. Something that could be a step towards getting to know each other better.
There's also that theme of like opposite attracts, like the Little Mermaid trope, like the sea versus the land, and clearly like, and I'm not saying Geralt is immortal, but just there's clearly that theme going on here, but Sapkowski does it in a really silly way, because you're kind of questioning like which love story is the Little Mermaid story within A Little Sacrifice. You know what I mean? There's kind of little sprinklings in there between Essie and Geralt, but also Aglaval and Shianese. I should see it Shianese because it's Sheenaziz now. I'm saying it around but there is definitely that opposite attracts thing going on here.
And there's definitely something that stays, that like, if you want to think of like Essie's pearl is a thing of the ocean, right? And where does it end up? Buried in the earth with her,
Ooh, nice.
Like again, what does it mean? I don't know, but like there's definitely there's connections throughout the story of like, I feel like pretty much everything that is mentioned, like even from like the silly wedding or engagement party, like these things are all kind of, they stand with some significance in the story.
Things really come full.
We're not as smart as Sapkowski to understand what they mean.
well, think about it like this: things are really coming full circle, right? Like the pearl is first in the sea, and then it ends in the land. We kind of see like this, like at the start of the story, there's like all these like unreachable, impossible things that we think cannot happen, and then by the end, most of them happen. You know what I mean? Even Essie's worst fear of dying alone, sick, like happens. You know what I mean? It's kind of all of these things happen. It's kind of like what's that self-fulfilling prophecy type deal going on.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I think maybe to add what you were saying, Michal, something that we tried to come up with something to phrase during our call, and I said something to the effect of a lot of stories have like a central theme that everything, all the characters, the dialogue, the plot kind of hover around that center. This one is more like a mesh where everything connects to everything else, but there isn't one central thing that it connects to, unless you want to maybe say love, but love is just too broad a topic to be a central theme. I think you need to be a little more specific, which is why we boil it down to things like love across borders, or the confusion of love, or the endlessness and infinity of it, or comparing it to the sea, all those metaphors like that.
Yeah. And all of these things involve sacrifice, but they aren't defined by sacrifice. So it's so interesting that like on the surface level, sacrifice is the central theme of the story, but like when you go deeper, it's kind of like it's a part of everything, but it's not like the defining trait. And that's really interesting. I just wanted to also bring up stylistically, music and storytelling is a really important thing in this story. It's obviously like it starts off with, Dandelion, like, well, I mean, it starts off in like a scene right out of a movie, really, It's so visual and awesome. But, I think Dandelion always wants the story. He wants to be there for the story. And like, he starts, I think he says to Geralt that like, he makes up a story about a mermaid, and Geralt's like, oh, that's nonsense. No one's going to believe it. And he says that it's not made to be believed. It's made to move the audience. And that is kind of one of the first times that Sapkowski kind of takes the idea of storytelling as a meta force within his work. And that becomes a big deal later on.
You're right.
Yeah, it's like I feel like one of
like
the
a tidal wave.
But like one of the things I would tell people stylistically about The Witcher is that like it is an incredibly meta and cognizant story. I also think it's just, it ends with that super weird little interaction that like a vicious, hungry werewolf comes to Dandelion, and he's watching the camp, but he sees that it's Dandelion telling this story that no one else ever hears, and he listens and leaves. And it's such a like, again, one of those things I don't think you can define exactly what it means, but it really, I think, speaks to the power of stories and the power of just like what's going on here, right? Like the like what's being captured, the deeper truth, even in the falsehood that Dandelion is singing about.
It reminds me of the phrase, that old cliche phrase, music soothes the savage beast a little bit. But
don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, but I don't think that comes close to capturing it. Like what you said, I think is closer to maybe, well, at least I interpreted that as the power of story, which that saying I just uttered is just an extension of that concept.
Yeah. So, and it's so important too, because quickly, when a werewolf shows up, you think that Geralt's going to take care of it,
Yeah.
Dandelion takes care, and Dandelion is the one with the power over this werewolf, and that's just a really interesting thing to me.
I want to highlight Yormi in the chat here. One could say that Geralt is scared of his emotions because if you suppress them for long enough, when they do surface, it's equivalent of a tidal wave.
Yeah, I responded to him in chat because that is really similar to something a therapist told me once. She said, you have to address your childhood before you get older because it's harder. The older you get, the harder it is to address it. And she described it using a water metaphor. She said it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can do it, but it's hard. It takes a lot of effort, and just a little slip up and it just flies right, shoots up if you let go, right? A beach ball just flies right out as soon as you let go of it, right? And so it's just kind of like that same metaphor of a tidal wave. If you hold it back, you're just going to make it stronger when it does happen. You need to deflate it, not try to hold it back. And that's beautifully framed in this story with these monsters emerging from the deep amidst all these themes of love and devotion and sacrifice and all that. So it kind of like serves to be that hidden menace that isn't addressed.
I can speak to that as I have experienced that, like things like that I experienced as a child, like harboring, like as I get older, like trying to let go of things, or do I still harbor resentment? You know what I mean? Like these feelings of guilt, like of these things that you can't necessarily control because they're in the past. You know what I mean? And that's such a hard thing to go forward. Like, how can you move on from that? You know what I mean? How can you move on from these things?
Yeah, you can't. That's why it has to be addressed. You'll never just escape it. You'll never swim away from it, it'll always be there unless you face it. So,
which is like a great parallel for how Geralt is thinking about Yennefer. He's feeling guilt because he feels like everything is unresolved with her.
He is not going to get over her. He has got to go back to her. Yeah, it's just not going to go away.
I'll even point out that you can kind of view the city of Ys as sort of like that, like a representation of that suppressed trauma, right? Like it's always there, it's always waiting, and then it literally comes out and attacks Geralt in the exact manner that, like there's even that line that he and the fish person were equally matched and as fast as each other. So it is in a way almost like Geralt is fighting his own demons that have erupted from the earth after being from the sea after being disturbed.
And he fought himself last short story, the Doppler. So it's kind of like he's fighting himself like internally and emotionally.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
well, that's what you would have to do, right? I mean, like a rebound story that would make sense,
because you're these thoughts are in your head and you're trying to figure out, and sometimes like your anxiety or depression will lie to you about things. It will like tell you these falsehoods, you know what I mean? And then you like get confused, which Geralt clearly is confused.
Oh yeah.
Good thing he gets unconfused pretty soon.
He's never faced anything like this before. Yeah.
But that is a good point, right? Like, what are you actually fighting when you're getting over a relationship or whatever? Like, you're dealing with yourself. My mom has a phrase. She's a teacher, and like sometimes kids like transfer to different schools, and she's like, well, you can leave, but you have to take yourself with you. And like it's sort of like Geralt's like carrying himself around with him. Like,
See the dilemma of this short story? Like it's incomplete, but yet it feels it's like these deep subjects that we're talking about here, and like, you know what I mean? It just feels like it's setting us up for these two huge emotional moments that are coming in Sword of Destiny and something more. It really does.
Yeah, good. Well said. Yeah. What else do we have here for? Actually, I have something else. The code part, like the code and the dilemma issue. I wanted to add something to that as well. It's super important as a Witcher for their training, right? You can't have that. It's one thing to have this moral conundrum about killing off the clock, but like you can't suddenly be like, is it wrong to kill in the middle of battle? You gotta. That's why you can't. That's why it has to be sort of settled ahead of time, and that's a simpler version of handling your emotions from your childhood. It's like you have to settle these things. To make these decisions, you have to be clear on where you stand before you go into battle. Ditto before you go into relationships. You have to know yourself. You have to take care of yourself and prepare yourself to be capable of holding up your end of the relationship bargain with whoever you're with.
Mm-hmm. But it is also Geralt, I feel like he retreats to that idea. Like in the Bounds of Reason, he was going on and on about his code and I'm an unfeeling golem and blah blah blah, like all that stuff. And I feel like he retreats to that when he's feeling uncertain and like feeling feelings, so like that's kind of like Essie, tries to diagnose him with sensitivity, and he that's kind of when he pulls out this line about like, oh no, I have a code. The code decides for me. I'm a professional, blah, blah, blah. You're sensitive. And she's like, me, a poet, sensitive? No.
Geralt only really breaks the code too when it concerns people that he loves and love in general, I think. Mm-hmm. Right? Like whether it's like saving Ciri or protecting Yennefer or in this case, like not killing a mermaid, you know what I mean?
Maybe that's what the saying should be. Get you someone that makes you break your code. That's how you know it's real. They make you want to break your codes.
I'd be really interested if other people see like, as Aziz described so well, like this is kind of a mesh and like with individual kind of thematic strands through it. So I would not assume that we have found all of them. So I'm interested to see what other people think are in the story too.
Yeah, the chat's been hitting us with some good comments here.
Yeah, it's funny because I went and had a couple of discussions on Reddit, and there were some like really brilliant points about this one. Like, obviously, people were crushed by the ending and whatnot, but I think it's interesting that this story is a lot of people's favorites, at least from Sword of Destiny, anyways.
I wonder about that. Like, as far as people who are like deep in the fan, sometimes there's like a difference between like people who have seen or read everything once versus people who are like rereaders, like really deep. Sometimes there's a difference. There's like a popular favorite, and then there's like a fandom favorite. Like in Game of Thrones world, it's like the popular one is A Storm of Swords.
Feast for Crows is great, actually.
But people who have like read multiple times will say Feast for Crows is the best one. So it's like that kind of dichotomy. Or I wonder if
a lot of people were saying Sword of Destiny is easy because of the bridge of like, this story, the something more, the all the Broken Law and 4 stuff. I think also too, like we also kind of had the Game of Thrones effect, speaking a little bit about what happened with Witcher Netflix. Like people went out and bought these books directly after the season they sold out. And a lot of people have just got into the franchise now. Mm-hmm. But now like for example, like when we have our discussions behind the scenes, we're like, oh, like after this read, I appreciate this story so much more. That's what we keep on saying with these short stories.
Yeah.
They really give you perspective on like, these like kind of smaller nuanced things that Sapkowski's trying to point us towards. And I just feel like this one, like it's just, oh man, it's just, it's incomplete, but it really connects to everything.
Yeah, it's very rich. I mean, there's so much in it, even if it's like, not all in the same category of rich, or I don't. Again, we just like struggle to find the right words.
Macrophage in the chat also said that it's about Sapkowski's love for fishing, and I do have to point out we do have a fish stew reference, or at least seafood stew reference, because when Dandelion's picking up all the mollusks, he's like, "Oh, we can make stew out of the meat," and then it stinks. And then what they end up doing is working together to make a lamb stew in the end. So soup always brings people together, whatever it is.
Maybe that's why Sapkowski likes flying fish. Because he likes fishing. And someday he hopes he's going to see a whale jump out of the water and greet him.
Well, shall we talk about a little of the lore and world building, which really it fits really well in with some of the stuff. Let's start with this quote.
Yeah. What are witches for, if not so that decent folk don't have to rack their brains about how to rid themselves of monsters? Can I tell you guys how much I fucking hate Aglifar? He sucks. I have been keeping a mental list of all the people who are the worst, and he is on there.
You should see our document. It's actually in bold letters. Nivellen wasn't even in bold letters like this. This is all capitalized, chat.
Yeah, the thing about him is he's actually got power. That's one thing that I like over Nivellen is like kind of helpless. He's stuck. This guy actually has power. He can do things. He has authority, but he mostly just chooses to be petty. Okay, so Bremervord is the place where this takes place, and it's not terribly far from the site of our last story, which is Novigrad. It's just if you follow the coast south, or if you look at the map and look at Bremervord and follow the coast north, you'll get to Novigrad. So either way, and that's actually something that you can follow more consistently in this book versus the first one, which, as we know, jumps around in the timeline. So if you follow the path that these stories are, it's just basically there's a bit of a pattern to it. In fact, it's really strong in the next book. We're basically going to start, or not the next book. The next story is basically to start right where we left off, effectively, because at the end of the story they cross the Adalat River, which is the border of Sidaris, and that's putting them right next to Broccolon, which is that's where Geralt is. Geralt, of course, he's by himself at the beginning of the next story. Anyway. So Bremervord is a vassal to Sidaris. The king of Sidaris is mentioned in this as someone that's a fan of music, that they could spread tales to him to make Aglaval look bad. It's near Roggeveen, which is where Vilgefortz is from. It's also near Rissberg and Ravelin, and those are both pretty important locations in a Season of Storms. It's also the home of Valdo Marx. If you guys remember the name Valdo Marx, he was one of the bards that Dandelion is in competition with. When in the Last Wish, Dandelion wished that Valdo Marx would have something awful happen to him. I can't remember which awful thing it was, but that's the thing. So if you're looking at the map, Bremervord is that long jut that sticks out from the coast. It's actually farther west than even the capital of Skellige, Caer Troden. And it's also slightly farther west than Eighth Ginvale, which is far to the north. Of course, we were just in Eighth Ginvale. Speaking of Eighth Ginvale, there's this quote that I think is a nod where he says, Dandelion says, "It stinks terribly here, don't you think?" And Geralt says, "Does it? I've been in places where it smelled worse. It's only the smell of the sea." And I remember how he was just complaining about how much it smelled up in Eighth Ginvale, and a lot of that was just his own attitude and not the actual smell, but still, it did smell. He was, that's the one where he fought the Zoogle in a sewage pit to start off, so,
oh my God.
It was so gross. So yeah, there's Bremervord hasn't existed very long. It was basically this pearl diving industry is what started this town. It's basically dependent on that wealth, which is why it's such a big deal that everyone stops going out to fish or pearl dive, because it's literally where the town gets its money from. So it really is a big problem. You might wonder why the conflict with Ys and Bremervoort hadn't happened in the past. Like, why is it just now happening? If this ancient city has been here for so long, well, there's your answer. It's that the Bremervoort itself is fairly new. And they're early on, they're collecting pearls. And because no one's ever done this in the area, initially it's somewhat easier. And then time passes, they have to start going farther out to find pearls. And that's when we find ourselves at the beginning of the story. The range of their pearl diving expeditions has started to encroach on the people of Ys. So we talk about Ys briefly. Actually, do you guys have anything to say about that, or should we just move on to
No, continue, my man.
Cool. So if you notice, you look
I feel like I'm a fan of the podcast. I'm listening right now, and I'm just like enjoying what Aziz is saying. I'm just like, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
So it can be seen on the map, Ys can. A lot of Witcher maps actually show it. You can look, just off the coast and see it there. Michael Klarfeld included it in his version that we use for our cover and that you see behind
background
me
right now.
Yeah. So it's actually there. I would wonder if in the time of the elves, if they were communicating with them directly, because mermaids can, and mermaids are speaking the elder speech, or a version of the elder speech that's just, as it said, more euphonious. So that, I wonder if elves and mermaids and the fish people communicated. That's kind of neat. So you might have associated Ys with Atlantis, which, you're not wrong to think of that, but technically speaking, this is drawing from a Breton, as in Breton French, Brittany, not Britain, legend of what's called Caer Ys, which is Caer Ys, Keyrys, which is the legend from Breton France, Brittany. It's Caer is the Breton word for city, which is linguistically related to the Welsh word Caer, as in Caer Morhen and all that, Caer Trold, which is where Sapkowski got that word. So this is a pretty cool subtopic that you could look into on your own. I don't want to get too deep, pun intended, into the legendary city of Ys, but it's been written about by a lot of famous authors. There's a lot of songs and legends and stories and things like that. So it's pretty cool. It's supposedly just off the coast of Brittany itself. And there's a story about how it happened. There was like a prince and a princess and some dikes, meaning the water dam things. And those were flooded by, misadventures and sloppiness, and that flooded this city and created this sunken city and all that. So anyway, that's a pretty fun story, and that's the influence here. One last bit related to that is the fish people. That's a Slavic mythical creature, the Vodyanoi, which is mentioned briefly by that name. They're a little different in Slavic legend. Mostly there's like one Vodyanoi who's like the old man of the sea, and he's like got a green beard and he things like that. But these fish people, Vodyanoi, are more like H.P. Lovecraft's Deep Ones, where they have fish eyes but legs and they're armed and intelligent. Lots of different authors have borrowed from that tradition, including George R. Martin and others like that. So that's pretty cool. Also, I wanted to mention a thing about tonal languages, because he's drawing on that. As English speakers, which most of us are here, some of you are not, have no other languages, but we're actually in the minority. Most languages in the world are tonal. And when you think of tonal language as an English person, as an English speaker, you think of the word tone to you means like attitude, like give me that tone. But if you're sarcastic, that's a tone. That would mean you're reversing the meaning or adding emphasis. But strictly speaking, tonal languages, the tone actually changes the definition literally. In other words, like sarcasm in English can change the meaning from yes to no or something like that. But if in a tonal language, the difference between having the sound drift away or having the sound rise or keeping it flat, it changes the word from, instead of going from yes to no, you go from like yes to acorn or no to aircraft carrier, stuff like that. Just completely change the definition of the word. And I think that's a really clever thing to have done here, because mermaids are, as Kyle pointed out, they're associated with sirens, and sirens singing goes travels underwater much better than talking. It doesn't work underwater very well. And so having Sapkowski adopt that concept for the elder speech and for tonal languages is really neat, because it's fitting, like, logistically. It does seem like that's the kind of way it would develop, because regular speech just wouldn't work. So
I'm thinking of like elder speech of like these elves talking in such a like beautiful, eloquent way that you would be like entranced like a siren. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I think we're getting on with here, maybe.
Definitely, because I think Essie even points out, when she's describing her feelings to Geralt and lamenting that she's fallen for him, she's like, I wish you would cast a spell on me, because then I wouldn't feel shamed. I could say, oh, this isn't my own emotions sabotaging me. Like, her own emotions were causing her pain. But if it was someone else's spell, then she doesn't have to blame herself. So that's also a beautifully included theme here, because the siren song, like, drawing you, making you like fall in love with the mermaid or whatever, but it's inverted, where it's the humans going through that. And Shionats there's no evidence whatsoever that Shionats used any sort of magic on Aglaval. She used it on herself. But so this is really well done. Like, all these things tie together really well. They support the themes. They apply meaningfully in kind of not in fairly direct, but also indirect ways. So it's just really cool. I like all that stuff.
The siren symbolize temptation, desire in mythology, and there's stories that talk about sirens where like any man that like passes the aisle of a siren would listen to the sweet sounds of a siren. So that's pretty interesting. Like, we're seeing like this like, and even that's why I say kind of like this Little Mermaid siren mythology is also kind of in representation between Essie and Geralt, because like Essie has this like desire to be in love with Geralt.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of the mirroring we're seeing in like these kind of two love stories within this chapter. Is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the voice thing is very tied into the Little Mermaid. Like, the original Little Mermaid has, like Ariel, one of the most beautiful voices that she gives up, and all that.
Well, let's segue to that. We were going to talk about influences. Let's talk about Little Mermaid.
You kind of just jumped into it. It's awesome.
That's perfect. Yeah, no,
Let's go ahead.
Right on time.
Michal, go ahead.
You can't talk about the story without talking about the Little Mermaid, because it is definitely the fairy tale that Sapkowski is twisting. And the funny part is that he tells you almost verbatim through Dandelion the original Hans Christian Andersen version of the Little Mermaid, which is that the mermaid sacrifices her voice and her tongue in exchange for legs, and it's all magic, and she'll be betrayed by her lover and will dissolve into sea foam, which is all part of the original. There's also some Christian stuff in there about souls and interesting things, but and killing princes and things like that.
There's always that.
And I mean, tellingly, like the Little Mermaid story is even more sacrificial, because she becomes a beautiful dancer, but every time she walks, she feels like she's stepping on knives. And I really love how he kind of really twists, that story to like make it look like, to have it be scoffed at within the story is a really charmingly meta thing, but it's also really important for, again, the idea of like the story is meant to move you, and like it's kind of like it reminds me of Thor Ragnarok a little bit. In which, like, I saw Thor Ragnarok and I was like, this is so irreverent and so like deconstructive of like so many of these things that we've held really, really dear in Marvel for a long time. Like that scene where Hela's like walking through the treasure thing. She's like, garbage, fake, blah, all this stuff. But at the end, it really kind of there is a love for some of the symbology and some of the stuff that is in there, and it kind of proves its importance, even if it's not in the way you originally thought, like Asgard being a people, not a place, and all that.
Sapkowski has done this with almost every single short story as far as like the fairy tales and the influences go. Like for this one, it's Little Mermaid, but we talked about in the past, he's kind of done this like kind of flip things on his head to kind of give us these like as we think of the story, we think it's going to end a certain way, and then he kind of flips it.
No, but I think it's even more significant here just because he specifically references it.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
Dandelion's like, the story could go this way. And then,
exactly that. Yeah.
even when she and Oz comes in at the end, Dandelion's like, I knew it. She gave up her voice. She's like, bitch, I gave up nothing. Like, you know, like,
Sapkowski trolling us just right then and there.
Yeah.
I see a few people in the chat pointing out that, the original Little Mermaid is so much darker, like, than the Disney version. Yeah, and it's like, it's more like this one. Yeah. The dark ending for the mermaid in that story is a lot more like what happened.
It's very friggin' dark. It's suicide, dude.
Yeah, Essie gets Essie doesn't kill herself, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's the closest thing, the closest
Dying alone, which is fucking awful.
Yeah, really bad.
She doesn't die alone. Dandelion is with her.
Well, yeah, sure. But
So-
her worst fear comes true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't. It's too sad.
It is
Oh
so
my
sad.
God, we keep on talking about it. I'm getting triggered.
Okay, well, let's go back to some basic trivia then for just a minute, just to dial it back, just to catch a breath on our emotions. Some basic stuff about mermaids here. It's a lot like the dragon stuff, where we kind of just glazed over it because it's just such a massive lore topic. Like, half the cultures in the world have some sort of mermaid legend, and they still persist to this day. You still have people reporting mermaid sightings in 2021. So that's wild. Christopher Columbus, in his writings, he's like, I saw mermaids. Like, what? A familiar origin, we mentioned the sirens. Those are Greek, basically, but they're actually much older. They've been around since Babylon, and even older probably. That's just where we can be sure they appeared, is Babylon, but which is interesting because Babylon is not by the sea. So it really goes to show how far these things stretch. The arms of Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland, is a mermaid with shield and sword. An armed mermaid is the sigil.
The Sirenka.
Yeah. So
Sirenka.
and
I'm probably butchering that. Ludmila and our other Polish friends are probably like, "Oh my God, Kyle,
they're doing it again. They don't know how to pronounce anything." So there's this note about the Vistula River here. Hopefully we're saying that close to right, and they would swim up there. Is that right? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Also, as far as influences, speaking of Ludmila, who is our number one Polish consultant, she mentions there's some other influences. Another Brothers Grimm fairy tale, The Raven, which is one that Jaskier mentions about Queen Marianne and the Black Raven. Then there's the duet of Cynthia and Vertvern. Interesting. This one is she says it's from the first verse of a song from a Polish version, which I can't say the Polish words, but there's the original title of the song is Estat en grand concierge. I guess that's is that French maybe? I'm not sure, but it's the Comtessa de Dia was the author, female troubadour back in the day, long time ago. So there's a lot of real world influences here that a lot of us English speakers would miss, even if we got the Grimm's fairy tale stuff, that's a little easier to catch, I think. I think that's it for the influences, unless you guys have anything to add. We can move on to a little bit of character chat.
Oh, just the sirens are a little bit different than mermaids. They tended to kill sailors.
Yeah, it's interesting. In some traditions, absolutely. What I was reading about in Poland, the Polish tradition, they're basically the same thing. They don't really make a separation between siren and mermaid, which is interesting. But you're right. Most of the time, there is a difference. But I thought, given that Poland is the center of this, I thought that was worth pointing out.
Sirens were half bird, half women, but they were
So as a little segue to character chat, there's this character, Teleri Drauhard. He's the one that is hosting the wedding for his son and daughter. Teleri is probably a nod to Lord of the Rings, because the Teleri are the sea elves of Lord of the Rings. They're like one of the main races of the, like elvish divisional breakdowns, whatever you want to call them, like subgroups. So it's a pretty specific name, Teleri. It's spelled the same. So and of course, like most fantasy authors, there's not unlikely to be homages to Lord of the Rings, and I think this is one.
An homage.
Also, Macro with the donation. Thank you very much for that. Says, speak more Polish. I don't think you want to encourage me on that, okay?
We're gonna try to
We're going to have so many episodes we'll speak Polish, I think. I don't know.
Dzień dobry.
We're definitely going to pick up some along the way. Definitely going to pick up a little, if not.
I'm trying to remember from my trip to Poland if I had any. Dzień dobry is really all I remember.
Oh, you've been there?
Yeah, I've been to Poland.
That's cool.
Wait, you've never told us this.
Yeah, I was thinking for a sec, did I forget that you told
I mean, it was a Holocaust trip, so it doesn't usually come up in fun conversation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, understood.
I'm not gonna use the shame bell.
So yeah, okay. So what do you guys? Dandelion, we've talked about like how he's different in this story, yet not in a lot of ways. But I think his insight is one of the things that comes up. I think in Voice of Reason was the last time he was just really cutting with his insight when Geralt was depressed, and he points out, "Come on, Geralt, stop being down. You know, you can go. You know, it's not that bad." He's talking about how his profession is falling apart, and he's like, you're just not wanting to do it the way you want. And those were some really good conversations there. And this really reminds me of that, where he cuts to the chase and he's kind of rude about it, but he's also right in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? And I appreciate that.
They seem like equals, him and Geralt, for kind of the first time in this story. You know, like we still have instances. I don't know if I've ever brought this up, but my favorite thing that Dandelion does is in the writing when he writes Geralt. And he only does that like once, I think, like when they're actually like in the by the dragon's fangs. Yeah, he definitely, I mean, like there's still some gross stuff, like the game he plays with Viverka and whatever the other one, not my favorite, but definitely a marked improvement of Dandelion.
You think it's because of the time that Geralt, like now they've experienced a certain amount of time together. It's like almost like Dandelion understands Geralt more than himself in this situation because he's been a witness to all of his different dealings with. I mean, that's true. Like Dandelion doesn't actually have a prevailing want in this story, you know, and his want is usually just to sleep with whatever, you know. But like that's not very prominent here, and you know, even in the one with the Doppler, he's very physical, you know. He's like he wants beer, he wants food, he wants, you know, all this stuff, like he's swiping stuff all the time, and he's kind of less almost affected by that than Geralt in this story. Like Geralt, we experience his hunger, like his real like intense hunger, and Dandelion seems kind of chill about that.
Yeah.
Dandelion's intentions seem more pure, I guess.
He is at least consistent in that way, I guess. Like it's kind of, maybe it goes back to what you were saying about being sex positive. He just never, these things just don't bother him. He's always just really at ease with such things. The only time he ever really gets upset is when like he puts on airs. We see him like pretend to be upset, and it's often very comedic. But when he gets really upset, it's usually because someone is being awful to one of the few people he cares about, and he shows surprising like bravery and stick-to-itiveness. Like he doesn't abandon Geralt even in the water there when Geralt's telling him to run away, and Dandelion has no real ability to help him. And the same in other spots, like he's brave in the cave at the edge of the world when they're about to be killed, and he doesn't like turn into a weepy mess like, oh, please don't kill me. You know, he stands up and is mad, but he's mad on Geralt's behalf. He's like, you're going to kill him because of this, and he's not even speaking up for himself. So he does have that. We have seen bits of selflessness from him before. It's rare, but it is somewhat dependable. It's a very narrow range that activates it, but it's really potent when it is activated. And I think this is that again, but with someone other than Geralt, which is really strong.
Well, we see even in the beginning of the story, like, you know, what the reason they get into so much trouble at that fair or whatever is because Dandelion's almost like reacting to Geralt's anger, I think, right? Like, because the Rangers, which I definitely think is a Lord of the Rings reference and a twist on the noble Rangers of the forest there.
Oh, great point. Yeah. Great point.
So they're talking about all the innocent creatures that they've murdered and enjoyed it. And that's why, you know, Dandelion reacts so angrily, and that's what sparks, the whole thing. So I do think he is very gradually starting to think about people other than himself.
Yeah.
Who's the next character? Let's talk about Geralt himself, right? Recurring themes with him, I guess, about him not admitting to himself how sensitive he really is, or maybe it's just that it's growing. It's been growing within him since the start of the novels, and things that like the beginning of the novels is where he starts to change. But I'm not sure. What do you guys think about that? I wasn't sure whether Michal, you said you interpret the scene of him being mad at Dandelion. It's kind of like, is he mad or is he not? Is he?
The lady does protest too much, methinks.
Yeah. It's hard to tell, but I think you're right, probably.
I just don't think you repeat. Definitely not mad. Not mad at you. No. Like,
yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
And then Dandelion even shuts up, and it's
yeah.
Like, yeah.
And Dandelion will call Geralt out when he thinks he's putting up a front. So he seems to really think Geralt's upset with him, and
he usually yells about it.
Yeah. And he often is like, "Don't be upset with me over this. This is nothing." But
or he writes it in a damn ballad and tells everyone about it.
Oh, man.
It is, yeah. This situation does seem kind of different, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd say about Essie, if we can move on to her, I think we kind of explored most of her, but I kind of view her as a weird transitional figure for Geralt between Yennefer and Ciri, because she is, and I don't want to think about this too much because he does sleep with her and there's whatever, but there is that sort of range of woman from the goddess figure in his life who is very much in charge and takes over everything in Geralt's life, and then Ciri, who demands something completely different from Geralt, and protection and a much more kind of giving love, and obviously a daughter relationship.
Protection is more. Yeah.
So I think Essie kind of bridges that gap a little bit.
I agree with that too. Yeah, and I think because it's and from Dandelion's point of view, he says he doesn't say she's like a daughter. He says she's like a sister, which is also, a younger sister is something that often is portrayed as something that the older brother protects, right? But not
something that's platonic.
Yes.
Yeah.
But not quite as intense as the father-daughter protectiveness, which is the next step up, I guess, if you're looking at it in levels, if you're trying to quantify it. So I think that's a really good insight there, Michal. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Who else do we have? A couple other characters. Yeah, it's just in general so sad. I think seeing her as a transitional figure maybe helps be less sad about her because it's framing her as a character and less as a being, as less as a person. So
even though her death is sad, she was there's such a beautiful tribute to her.
Yeah.
And I think that softens the blow a little bit. You know what I mean? It's just while she died, there's such a poetic ending for a bard. You know what I mean? It's just such a beautiful thing. She's buried with her lute and the pearl.
And without saying anything specifically, her name / her presence will pop up during the main novels. We'll just leave it at that without being specific. So there's a little more of her soul. We'll say we'll have a chance to think back on this. We'll have reasons to come back to this at least for a minute later on. So that's nice, right? Or is it?
Often we don't hear characters referenced again, so it's nice to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Aglaval. I guess we pretty much covered Aglaval. He's just. But there may be more. Is there anything anyone else wanted to say about him? Does he represent anything? Is he a transitional character of his own? Is he showing us something that's more to come or anything like that?
No, he's entitled.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's, I don't know, it's not like he would be more justified in this if he were actually nobility or whatever, but there's something I think extra, he's shoving it in people's faces,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one refuses me.
Right, exactly. And I shall own the sea. And, what do you mean? My grandchildren will see the pearls. It's there are, apparently, Essie sees some redemptive quality in this guy, but personally, I do not. So
yeah, I don't either.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. That's what maybe the hope is we have to rectify that somehow. It's like people seem to really react really positively to Shionats, and I don't mean the characters in the story. I just mean like readers, and equally bad to Aglaval. Yet we have to somehow reckon with the fact that Shionaz is marrying Aglaval. Such a clearly she sees something in him. Maybe it's just she thinks she can change him. Maybe she's like thinks that, or maybe, and there's a little. It's more the other aspect of the sacrifice is it's not super mentioned, but her marrying him prevents war. Like, it stops bloodshed. So it's not just her legs and this relationship sacrifice. It's actually like has a lot of the same aspects to a royal marriage where two countries are strengthening their alliance, which does a lot to prevent bloodshed. So there's definitely like some duty. Some nobility duty going on here, at least
almost
on
like
her.
almost like an arranged marriage where it like creates an alliance between two people.
Yeah, but I think she's doing it. There's no real evidence that Aglaval cares about that aspect of it. Although maybe he does, it just doesn't seem to come up. So,
which makes me question what she's attracted to, if it's like his ambition or.
I do think that's probably my biggest beef with the story. Like. Is just the lack of understanding of why, because it is posed as such a like beautiful ending, you know.
Yeah, like why? Yeah, what is it about him? Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if we're being realistic, there's definitely a thing where you look out in the world and you see like there's some people who are just really terrible, but to their families or to their really close inner circle, they're pretty decent too. It's just like it's like everyone else thinks they're an asshole, and they are. If you're an asshole to everyone but a few people, I'd say you are an asshole. But
agreed.
He might be really good to her, and that maybe is.
But he's not. He's not. He's talking about putting her in a barrel.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
You know what's interesting about this is it kind of highlights Macro's comment. You love who you love, which people could question like how Geralt and Yennefer's relationships work from the outside, but then we see their kind of internal relationship as we're reading through the story and we're experiencing their love story, and then we're like, oh, we understand why they love each other. You know what I mean? It's like,
it's like a love doesn't make sense, so that's how it makes sense kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now I'm just imagining Sapkowski being like, love, what is?
Oh man,
that's cool. That's cool. All right, shall we move on? I've got some herb lore, and we can do that real quick. All right, cool. Let's run through that. So, standard disclaimer, with herb lore, symbolism, there's always a lot of different takes from a variety of cultures. So, consider this an overview rather than comprehensive or, definitive. Pearls are interesting. Of course, that's not a flower, but they are organic. If you've ever wondered about the terminology gem, gemstone, or stone, well, here is the example that sets the rest. Pearls are gems. They're not gemstones. Sapphires are gemstones. Rubies are gemstones. Emeralds are gemstones, but they're because those are stones. Pearls are not stones. They're organic. So they are, you put a little tiny bit of bacteria inside a mollusk or whatever, and it might turn into a pearl. They're associated with marriage. For the same reason white dresses are associated with marriage. They're a sign of fertility, especially in Asian cultures, and purity and all that. Interestingly, pearls are, in current times and in a lot of times throughout history, pearls are overwhelmingly worn by women only. But if you go back in time, that's not always the case. So that may change. It only takes, you never know. A new style may emerge in a year or two, and all of a sudden you might see dudes wearing pearls. But anyway. Verbena, that's, of course, the important scent that is associated with Essie herself. There's a huge, long history for it. Cool names like Tears of Isis, a.k.a. Hera's Tears, a.k.a. Ironhard, a.k.a. Medical Ironwort, a.k.a. True Iron Herb, a.k.a. Iron Grass, a.k.a. Devil's Bane. And the reason it's called Devil's Bane is supposedly it was the plant used to staunch Jesus' wounds after he was taken down from the cross. It was the most sacred plant to ancient Romans, verbena. It was also burned as an offering to Thor. It's considered something you can do to purify an area. Burn verbena, maybe kind of like sage, where you can purify an area before a ritual. But the thing that probably lands most is that it's anti-witch, which is kind of neat because if you look at it as Essie as the anti-Yennefer, the opposite to Yennefer, because witches, sorceresses. Yeah, so I like that. That's pretty cool. That one resonated. Also, it's mostly ornamental these days. It doesn't have the medical uses that it used to. The current medical science doesn't really think it has much value there, although alternative medicine does. So next up is mistletoe, which mistletoe and heather are both at the wedding, and that's why these are included. Mistletoe's nickname is dung twig because it spreads through bird feces. It's a symbol of male fertility, as a kind of in opposition to the pearls. It's the golden bough of Aeneas was made of mistletoe. In Rome, it symbolized peace, love, and understanding. Plur, right? Balder was killed by a mistletoe arrow in Norse myth. It's sacred to druids, meaning real-world druids in ancient England, ancient Britain. It stays green in winter, which is why it's associated with Christmas and the kissing tradition. Of course, the Christmas kissing tradition is probably something that a lot of us grew up with, and it seemed harmless. And now in modern times, it's like that's pretty gross, actually, because it was spread around as it was culturally believed that if a woman refuses a mistletoe kiss, it's bad luck to her. So it was really just a way for dudes to get women to kiss them. It seems like.
Oh, Essie does refuse a mistletoe kiss.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. So I was going to say that. That's so cool, right? And she does have bad luck, doesn't she?
What's also really interesting about the pearl is pearls are often looked at as perfect because they don't require shining like a diamond. This refinement, and the fact that Dandelion buries Essie with it. It's kind of feels like to me like an representation. Even though Geralt didn't choose you, you were perfect in your own way.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool.
I know that's kind of deep, but it's like if you think of pearls, they're hidden. There's this hidden meaning and wisdom to it. And I don't know. I just kind of thought of that. Maybe that's a little bit too deep, but
no, I like that. I appreciate that.
That's how I kind of feel like the thought of what if of Essie. You know what I mean? Like this untapped potential that often, pearls are dirty within a mollusk, and you know what I mean? And I don't know. That's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, that's good. No, I like that take, Kyle. Yeah. So because of its mistletoe is so associated with other non-Christian religions, Christian churches actively banned mistletoe inside. You probably still find that from place to place, like a tradition that's lingered. A lot of them probably don't even know why they banned it anymore, but it was a thing. Yeah, and very fittingly with the idea that it was used as a predatory way for dudes to make women kiss them is the fact that it's a hemiparasite, which means that it doesn't actually do very much. It just attaches itself to other plants and sucks up their nutrients. And before that was understood by modern scientists, it was seen as like a pairing, a bonding, like, oh, look, these two things are working together. Like it was, like creatures that, what's that word? When they help each other,
Symbiotic.
Yeah, people thought of it as symbiotic, but it's not. It's parasitic. So that's very appropriate to realize that this mistletoe thing is also kind of parasitic.
Is Geralt and Yennefer, huh?
Yes, so that's pretty cool. So next up we have heather, which was, like I said, mistletoe and heather were the main decorations at the wedding. Heather's also called Caluna or Caluna vulgaris or ling, and it's also called sweep clean because it's made into brooms. It's associated with good luck, admiration, protection, but most importantly, it's associated with beauty and unbridled passion and its consequences. So that's a bullseye here. Unbridled passion and its consequences, especially for Essie and her falling impetuously for Geralt. So that's really big. Of course, it's important in Scotland. The term heather is associated with Scotland a lot, although it doesn't actually originate there. Also, it lasts through winter, just like mistletoe. And it lasts through winter. It can actually survive through winter, so it's really tough and strong, and that's part of why it's so popular as an ornament. Also, it's associated with fulfillment of a dream, which in this case, didn't happen, I guess, depending on which dream you look at. Now, last but not least, we have chrysanthemums. Now, this one really hits hard because It symbolizes death in several cultures, including Poland, especially Poland. It's placed on graves to honor the dead during All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. So if you're a Polish reader and you saw this moment, you might have saw it as ominous. And the moment I'm referring to is when Essie's done performing, she's given a bouquet of not just chrysanthemums, but wilted chrysanthemums.
Like, hey, you're going to die. This is foreshadowing.
Yes. So, like, us English speakers probably missed that, but a lot of Polish people were like, whoa, that's very ominous. And, of course, chrysanthemums, man, that's a hard word to say. It's a Greek word, but it's predominantly a Chinese thing. They're huge in Chinese culture. It's one of the 4 so-called gentlemen or 4 noble ones of Chinese gardening and artistic traditions: plum blossom, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum. Also, it's an imperial symbol in Japan. It's used for tea. It's a natural insecticide. And the yellow chrysanthemums symbolize slighted love. So that also fits quite well. Yeah, that's it. There's the herb lore. Pretty cool. Lots of bullseyes, lots of really strong meanings, and good stuff.
That's awesome.
Lots of great symbolism with pearls and chrysanthemums and verbena, the different scent. There was a lot of that, and this is a longer short story too. So I figured we would get more of it. But
it's slightly on that topic. Actually, it's 62 pages, which is not quite the longest, but the longest is like 65, so it's really close.
Slightly longer than like the 43, 45 average we get with them.
This is about as long as Bounds of Reason.
Shall we move into some of our funniest moments, and then we shall get to the outro?
Yes, let's have some laughs.
All right. Where shall we start?
I can't get over the part where Geralt is like lying on the palliasse or whatever, and Dandelion comes in and is like lays down and just yanks. So casually mentioned, he like pulls the blanket off of Geralt.
Blanket thief.
It's so good.
Oh my god! And it's such a thing that would be like, I don't know. It just conjures so many different things, like intimate relationships, but also like romances, and like just so funny.
Yeah, I laughed so hard. I actually didn't even notice it the first time I read the story. It just like went right by me. And then the second time, so it was a pleasant surprise. I just started laughing so hard. And we start with the interpreter trope, which that's a solid choice for comedy. You know comedy is coming when the main character is interpreting for languages, because it's always you get the situation where the person's like, do I really want to translate that? And you as the reader or the watcher get to experience that consternation right along with them.
Geralt being the meathead in this situation, kind of.
And there's something really funny at the end where the end of the first section where she tells him to go dry up, and Geralt's like, she told you to go drown yourself.
Yeah.
Good translation.
And how about Geralt at the feast, where it's just like finally gets the seat, and he's like, well, I'm gonna eat whatever's in sight, and then there's like the old guy that's just like, here, eat this. Here, eat this. He's like, yeah, okay, I'll eat that.
Sexual laxity.
Yeah. And then
that's also just really funny to me, because like half of this story is just kind of Geralt being like, I hungry Geralt.
Yeah, hungry and angy. Hungry, angy, and then a little bit of horny.
Is he stress eating because of his longing for Yennefer?
Maybe.
The rebound phase. You think you would? We kind of discussed in the last one where it's kind of a time to go out with the boys to the bar. But now he's in that like stress eating phase. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah. So the groom, I don't know. You may have caught this, but it's not. I don't think it's explicitly stated. It's so you can piece it together. But the groom's name is Gaspard, and the family name is Drauhard. So yes, the guy's name is Gaspard Drauhard. So that's the groom. And then, but my favorite quote, I think, of all it's totally does to do with nothing whatsoever. It's just Dandelion like trying to pass the time when they're right near the end of the story, when it's story time basically, and he tells them of the royal quadruplets of Ebbing, dreadful, exasperating brats called Putsy, Gritsy, Mitzi, and Juan Pablo. Vassar Miller.
Juan Pablo Vassar Miller? Okay.
I was like, that is so random, but so funny.
That's so funny. You're not sure if you're supposed to laugh at it.
Yeah, like, wait, what's going on here?
Each of the first 3 names are 5 letters, and then you have 4, 5, and then there's 12. So it's like 20 characters. Yeah.
Does Vassar Miller mean like water maker? Is that?
Ooh, is it? Oh.
Let me Google this real quick. Actually, then Vassar Miller.
That's a good theory. Or good guess.
Meaning Vassar Miller meaning. Oh, Vassar Miller. Vassar Miller was a writer and a poet. Vassar Miller, Vassar Miller, was a writer and a poet. She served as a poet laureate of Texas.
What?
Miller was born in Houston, Texas, the daughter. Okay. I don't know if Sapkowski was pointing to this person. I don't know.
Interesting. Well, as usual, when we start doing even basic research, it leads to fun places.
And I do just have to shout out again, Geralt, like literally just unable to function in the first moments where he is in the presence of 2 bards. Just like,
yeah, he's like, oh god, there's 2 of them. Oh. I don't know if any of you watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but it reminded me of the moment where the episode with Country Mac, and there's like, oh my god, there's 2 of them, City Mac and Country Mac, and like, oh no, there's 2 of them.
Yeah, there was a nice mix of silly and serious, as there always is.
Yes.
Yeah.
But a little bit more sadness at the end, which I guess you want to get to before our outro, Aziz?
Sure, yeah. Let's see. Wait, what part is this? Did I miss something?
Oh, I thought you were. Are we still going to read that part, or?
No, we don't have to read it. We kind of touched on it earlier, but it's just go back and read the last couple paragraphs of the story if you
read
want.
it again and drown yourself in sorrow, everyone.
We talk about drowners as a creature, or they talk about drowners, but really the real drowner is Sapkowski himself.
Yeah, true. And this is nothing compared to. Nope.
And that's the podcast of surprise for you, everyone. This has been an absolute pleasure to be back here with you. This was a very interesting story. Like I said, kind of all over the place, but really, I think, as a bridge to the next 2 stories that we're going to get to. And only 2 more stories left. 2 more short stories to get to until we get to Blood of Elves. And things are looking good on the Witcher Season 2 filming area. So I think by the time we get there, we'll be, nice. Like, we'll have a few episodes in for Blood of Elves by the time the show comes back, and that'll be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, it does seem like it's getting news is perking up there, and it looks like it's more towards the end stages. So that's nice.
It's so funny every time Lauren. I'm forgetting her last name.
Hitzrich.
Yeah.
Posts on Instagram. I'm like, God, you've been filming this almost for like more than a year. This is like
2 years.
Longest TV productions. It's like craziness.
Yeah,
almost 2 years.
So they've had so many delays. There's COVID. There's Henry hurting his leg. There's Henry just being like a humongous star that's in everything. There's, I'm sure there's just general production issues that come up, that we're not privy to as well.
Yeah.
So.
But like we said, they're still filming. There a lot of cool news on Ciri and Temple of Melitele and Neneki, which is going to be in Season 2. I'm going to be doing a news stream sometime next week. I'll post it in the pod of surprise for you guys.
Oh, cool.
Everybody that wants to join, can feel free to. If not, you don't like you like being surprised, then cool. That's cool too. But yeah, we would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Like I said, we got 2 more. Next, we got Sword of Destiny. So that'll be a fun one where we get some Ciri and Brokilon Forest. Because that one, and we can talk a little bit about how maybe a little bit more of the changes from the show and this story. Because there's a lot of comparisons that we can do there.
There'll be some good lore with the dryads and some ancient stuff like that. Instead of deep in the sea, we would go deep in the forest.
And prophecy, starting to get into some prophecy and some really deep mythology that I think we're all really excited about. Yeah, I think we're all really excited to start to get into not that we don't like these short stories. We're like, let's get to the main shit,
It feels so close now, too. Yeah, you're right. Because as we just said in this episode, it feels like this is the last true standalone story. It's like Sword of Destiny is more like a true prequel, if not part of the main series. So, yeah.
We talk behind the scenes about how our format will evolve. Our format will probably evolve as we get into the Blood of Elves because there's not short stories, there's chapters. We'll have to kind of figure out a way to kind of formulate that, but we'll figure out a good way.
Yeah.
We'll still have a lot of themes and mythology that we'll discuss, and I don't think we'll change too much, but
yeah, similar but different. Yeah, just
more episodic
tweaks. Yeah.
But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Of course, if you're listening to this, you can support us on Anchor. There is that support button. We just want to do a shout out for the thanks, and a thanks for the people that are supporting us, Aziz.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maura Lee, Ryan B., Sam D., James G., LC, Amy Blackfire, Barry Watson, and Anonymous. There's some anonymous supporters as well. So y'all, thank you very much for helping us a little bit out on the financial side. We would be doing this regardless, but it really does help. It pays for some of our costs, all that, and it is a little bit of a motivator. It's validating and all that. So we do appreciate it very much, and we'll keep them coming.
And thank you to Thomas and Macro for the donations today. We appreciate that. And what's next for you guys? What's next for you, Michal?
I'm podcasting at Level 7 Access and writing a little bit more, possibly about some upcoming Marvel excitement on television. That's pretty much, you can catch me at the Vassals every so often. We just released, we had kind of a 24-hour Vocathon where we just kind of hung out on Zoom for a long time and in a game of trivia, and that was really fun. So you can listen to just the trivia part if you want on our feed.
And yeah, the WandaVision ending. Oh my God, WandaVision was so good. I was talking about it with Hax Dogma, who was here earlier in the chat. We do a podcast every Sunday called the Marvel Podcast, but we were just talking about how good that was. Have you checked it out yet, Aziz? Have you decided to check it out yet?
I'm going to now that it's over. I was going to kind of
binge
do it all at once. Yeah. It went well. Like you're right. Like
you'll watch it in one day. It's like 6 or 7 hours of content. So
That's probably what I'll do. That's kind of what I did. I wasn't with it week to week, and I fell behind. I was like, I'll just watch it all when it's done, assuming it does well. That's the benefit to waiting is that if it ends poorly, people will be like, then I can avoid it. But no, it got great reviews from people I respect, so I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, and Falcon and Winter Soldier next week will be cool. I'll be talking about that. But what's next for you, Aziz?
Well, we just finished up the main portion of Valar Rereadus over on History of Westeros, so we're getting ready to start doing Winds of Winter chapters, the pre-release versions, and we're actually arranging audio production versions of that with music and different person voicing each character. So that's going to be really cool when it's done. We've got Michal's involved in that as well. So we'll have some fun and post those around, share those around when they're finished. So there's going to be 10 of them. So that's really cool. We're working on the second one right now. The first one's about ready to come out. So that's going to be awesome. We're going to do that in tandem with analyzing those chapters. And then, of course, we're still churning out scripted content in the meantime as well. So that's that.
Yeah, you guys, anybody who wants to go check out Michal or Aziz, link in the description of the video. You can find their YouTube pages, their social media pages. You want to go support them because of their awesome content. Of course, you can go check us out on Anchor. The links to Spotify, iTunes, all of that is linked in the description of the video where you like to do your listening. And yeah, just thanks everyone again for joining us. This has been a real pleasure being back, and we'll be back with the next one, Sword of Destiny, in a few 3 or 4 weeks for you. And we'll start to get towards the end of Sword of Destiny. It's kind of bittersweet because I've loved this short story format, but I am so excited to get into the main stuff and kind of get into Ciri and all of that. So that's got to bring an interesting dynamic to the podcast.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah, brother. With that said, everyone, have a marvelous day. We shall